one thing when it comes to the participatory approach, and this is just a comment because this is also what we are, of course, in a very tiny version of what we are trying to do here. So I think it's very, very important to put people in touch with art, create chances to, to get in touch with art in a very informal way. Because as you said, very often the problem is that there is this elitary approach, and you have the feeling that you cannot engage with contemporary art just because you don't have, I don't know, you don't have the background or whatever. While it's just, I mean, it's enough and more than enough to open up to the, to open up to.
Yeah, it was, so recently I was doing a lecture at the Hello Museum, which is a museum for children actually, in Songso-dong. And, but the lecture was actually for students of the BA in like art history or like fine arts. And I talked about this. And there's one student that asked me one really interesting question. He told me, but people should do whatever they want. Like, okay, you want so much to have them access contemporary art or the art institutions, but people can be more interested in music or like in theater or in sports. So why do you care so much about it, right? And I thought that this was a very interesting question because of course everyone is free to do whatever they want, but when there is an historical and social cultural construction that frames in our mind that something is not for us and it's so much absorbed within our culture that we just think because it's so rooted and systematized that we just don't consider the possibility since the very beginning of our growing up that actually the museums is something for us. It means that when kids look at the various options of what they would like, they do not consider that. When parents from, for instance, like various like different community don't think that that is something for them, they will not bring their kids there. So the idea of really opening the doors is not really because we really want at all costs that people get interested in art, but because we kind of want to break that barrier that has been socially constructed for so long. And so to let them know, there's also this possibility. Like you can then like just be interested in football for all your life. Like that's totally fine. But there's also art. But in this moment, there's not this chance to see all this in a horizontal scale. So this is what we're trying to do. And it's very hard.
Thanks for this. Yes, thanks. Jaime. Okay, the camera is there, the mic is here.
I never looked in the camera, so I apologize.
Is this okay? Yeah, okay. You started talking about the logistics of, producing the works for the Biennale.
Yes.
And how they were mostly, starting off as artist residence opportunities. I would like to hear more about those logistics from the curator side.
Okay.
So, you bring in an artist and you have a show to produce, and what happens in between? How much of a collaboration is it, or what happens to the works when the show is over, and who gets to keep those?
So that is a very interesting question. So there's a lot, like I would say that the hard work comes exactly there, right? So already making a residency happen is like not easy at all, in a sense that to be able to find that opening with the right institutions, to find the fundings for it, to find everything is not so easy. So that was a lot of work done by the institute and by me in order to find like institutions that were interested in collaborating, that were interested in hosting the artists. And we looked at the various partnerships that we had already established. And I would say that is the importance for, as well as like curator, for projects this big to work together with institutions that are already rooted into the landscape. of the hosting country is because they already have these ties. So these ties is very, very difficult to create and to establish. So Seoul Institute of the Arts, for instance, was a long-term partner of the Italian Cultural Institute. So we had already that conversation on the option, but the residency was the first residency actually that we're hosting. So a lot of logistic math happened, of course, because like it's not that easy to manage that chance, and especially from the curatorial perspective to kind of manage the whole balance between the artist's vision, the possibility that we have, the logistics, as well as from really organizing the travels of the artist to the various places where she collects the material, as well artwork shipping, which is something that is perhaps we talk a lot about sustainability, but shipping works, it's not sustainable at all. So and the costs in the pandemic raised a lot as well. So finding the right partners, I think a lot of work is to establish technical partnerships. This becomes very beneficial for a big project, because of course you start with the idea that you don't have all the funding for doing something like that, and there's so much expenditures happening. So if you're able to do good fundraising and establish good partnerships, especially technical partnerships, so they don't give you money, but they give you they provide a service that otherwise you could not get access to. So for instance, for the sound as well, of Yuval Avital's work, which needs so much high quality sound, we partnered with Bang & Olufsen, which is a very good sound company that they provide us with that. And for the residencies as well, we got also fundings from institutions such as the Quadriennale di Roma, which is a foundation in Italy that works for the internationalization of Italian art. So they provide grants as well for that. So that's a lot of work that needs to be done at least 1 year in advance in order to start envisioning a possibility safely, I would say. That's why events like that, I would say that needs at least 1 year of preparation minimum. So we started working with less than 1 year, actually. We started working in September because the Biennale contacted the Italian Cultural Institute during freeze, so in September and beginning of September, and we started really visiting the venues and everything just in October. So we had very, very and little time to operationalize everything. And of course, between curatorial standpoint and practical standpoint, there's you will always have to find a compromise. And so there's the ideas, there's the artist's ideas, and then there's what actually in practice you can do. But it's often very different from what you envision in your mind. And I think that comes with a lot of conversations and comes with a lot of accepting as well the limits that you might have in terms of production, in terms of transportation, in terms of everything. So for instance, we decided to use residencies because we wanted to enhance cultural exchange as well, but also because shipping from Italy was not possible, literally financially impossible to do. So you're trying to find the ways in which you can benefit from those constraints, and working around those constraints is not always easy, but puts in the creative mindset the idea of you benefit from those if you manage to do so. And I think that comes as well with working between curator and institutions. I think this is another big point. As I was talking before, the biennales are places of diplomacy and resistance, meaning that meanings are always layered. So how do you work together? How do you put together the willingness and the ideas of an institution that once, of course, has its own agenda, right? And as a curator, you manage to link that to the artist, to the artistic practice in a way that it doesn't become just diplomacy for the sake of diplomacy, which we don't want that. We are past that stage, hopefully. Not everywhere, but we try to be past that stage. So in the current stage of like cultural diplomacy, which theoretically is called like cultural relations, that the idea is that really like everyone becomes part of like creating cultural diplomacy and creating and working on transmitting this meaning across borders and across various disciplines. So in that way, that's another kind of like conversation that you need to have as well with the artists, with the institutions, that you need to find the right balance, which is not easy, but I don't know if we did well, but we tried. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much for such an interesting exposition. And I have two quick questions. One is that when you mentioned to changing the perspective in this exposition, you meant to shifting the perspective to everything that the artist can see, or what?
So from shifting the perspective, you would say like for instance, like the paradigm shift, or shifting from like human-centric to like post-human-centric, or like in general, the idea of like transformation and change in terms of paradigm is something that is very much theoretical, but it's interesting to try to put it into practice. So the idea, you're a scientist, so you know that, you know, Thomas Kuhn and like the philosophy of knowledge, and the idea of every era and every development of like thought within certain kind of era exists within a paradigm, meaning that there's ecosystem and framework of thinking that informs that kind of act and theoretical knowledge and practice. Talking about human-centric means that the whole way in which we think posits us at the center, right, of the universe, and like everything is related to us, and it's because of us happen, and this is like how the world will develop. And what now we're trying to shift in certain ways, because of the consequences that it had in terms of like climate, environmental crisis, etc., is to try to shift that paradigm. So to try to like envision us in a more horizontal way with like the world we exist within. So what artists can do, of course, they cannot change the world. Like, we're not arrogating us with like this possibility, and but rather what art has the ability of is two things related to like more scientific background and frameworks. The first is speculation, in the sense that art can generate from speculative thinking, meaning that we don't have rules in art. Like we can create possible worlds that actually don't exist. So the idea of relating art and the environmental conditions comes with the idea that art can speculate on new possible worlds, new possible ideas, without being scientifically correct. We are not interested in that. We just want to nurture the imagination, and we can do it in a generative way, meaning that instead of like pointing out, okay, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, it's like, okay, let's get over it, let's be the narrative. So let's try to like show and direct into a new way of thinking. So that's the first thing that art can do. And if done well, art can also create a good conversation on scientific topics that are like very difficult, very abstract, very complicated. So it can provide accessibility also to scientific matters that are actually very much important for us to know, but that are not really, we don't necessarily have access to the knowledge that we need to understand them in depth, but we can become interested. And the second thing that art can do is related to representation. So representation is basically how we confer meaning to a specific concept and object. So representation in semiotics is more or less how meaning is attached to a concept or to something that can be physical or like non-physical. And representation is fully arbitrary, right? We just invent that something means something is not something that is like established. What art can do is that can help like stretching those meanings. So it can help like, because it's speculative, because it doesn't, like, artists can create anything out of, you know, like how do we call it, that the basically artistic license. So the idea that like, you know, like we can talk about anything. And so we try to stretch the representation and start representing also something that is not really yet there, right? So we just start to ignite the idea. So the idea of the gentle nudge, the idea of like, thanks to these presenting representations of things that don't exist yet, or like concepts that are not fully embraced yet, we give the gentle push that helps maybe embrace some new ways, if that makes sense.
I'm sorry, I know you didn't talk about this, your experience at CERN, but I don't know if you could like summarize in a bit like, because I'm very curious.
Okay, so as I was saying before, like so CERN is like this scientific lab in which they do particle physics research. So research on like the fundamental state and questions of our universe. You would explain it better than me as a theoretical physicist, but I'm gonna say it like that. And since 2011, CERN has this artist residency, which is called Arts at CERN. So a program in which they invite artists from all over the world to engage with physics. Is a research residency, meaning that there's no need for production there. Like the residency is not focused on having an artwork as a result. And this is very important because in that way, artists can really focus on like the process of like investigating their curiosity about various things. And then after, if they want, that body of research that they did will be embodied in artworks in the future. So what I was doing at the time of the residency in CERN was two things. I was working as an assistant curator to the head curator of the program. So creating the framework for those artists to work at the residency. So like we would see with the artists what were their interests. So there was one artist which is called Rosa Mankman, which was a very good artist from the Netherlands, and she was interested in image resolution. So imagine talking about the image resolution and the limits of its resolution of a particle detector for an artist, like how much they can learn, right? Other artists were interested in the relationship between the color of the sky and environmental pollution in terms of like more abstract data. So cloud experiments at CERN as well was like a source of inspiration for them. Other artists were interested in the idea of like antimatter, which people often confuse with dark matter. And so, you know, like the idea of like, you know, every artist that think about the idea of negative space. Think about like negative space and what antimatter can, I mean, dark matter as well, but like more approachable maybe is the antimatter right now for like research. Like you can tell them where they're like, they would be interested, like imagine them to go like to the antimatter factory of Austin, which is like a factory that produces antimatter. What would that mean? So like, you know, like this is like all the things that we would do. So try to help the artists delve into the realm of particle physics and mathematics and like theoretical physics and practical physics, experimental, etc. And then my research was investigating into what this residency would produce afterwards. So meaning like how the time spent at the residency would impact both scientists and artists. The big question is, okay, for the artists, it's more easy to understand how it would impact, but how can art impact science? That's the big questions that a lot of people that are skeptical of this kind of like collaboration have. It's like, why did have this? And you know, like, and this is like all kind of justifications that you need to have if you want funding. Because there's always the practical part into it. So it was really interesting to see how actually a lot of physicists that I would interview for my research talked about how it's helped them thinking like differently, how talking so much about their discipline to someone that is really foreign from that knowledge would have them actually become a critic of their own work and practice. And when artists, and you know, like sometimes artists have this imaginative capacity of like asking questions that are so much out of the blue and out of context, and how that can work for like someone that spends their day just self-reflecting on like specific themes so abstract. So that is something that really creates some really interesting conversation and knowledge, and I think that it can lead to a lot of interesting things. So that's what I did more or less there.
Thank you.
Hello, can I ask a question from a distance?
Oh. Hi, Marty. Hi, Sally.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm just kind of interested in representation in the art world, and I don't know if you would think it a fair comment that my perception is that the vast majority of artists are middle-aged white men.
Yeah.
Is that a fair criticism? And you talk about how you want to expand the potential audience for contemporary art. Isn't that a fundamental problem, really, with the art world still?
Yeah. That's a big problem. It's like one of our biggest problems that we have right now. So, and I think that it has been acknowledged since the last decade-ish, I would say. The idea that because representation is very much important in our cultural and social framework, because not only art, but like media, so cinema, TV shows, music, whatever, as for centuries represented white men, mostly, and has been accessible to white privileged men and women more recently. There has been a big acknowledgement, I think, since a decade more or less, also following big shifts in academia as well, and like, you know, intersectionality. So like the issues of inequality in the relation to race, class, and gender, especially in anthropology, sociology, art history, etc. And so what I think somehow various institutions and universities and cultural practitioners are trying to do is like shift that. How do you shift that? Big question. When you talk about representation, so for instance, like one big thing that you can do is that to represent those that have not had the chance to be represented before. So a lot of museums are trying to like shift to, for instance, art by indigenous community. That's what happened, for instance, for the Canadian Pavilion, that brought native art for the first time outside of Canada and first time in Korea. Of course, it has a whole political dimension to it because of how much press there has been in the latest years about in Canada and like the various things. But the way that institutions can do is like to open representation to like the various like minorities that have not been acknowledged today, and as well as like trying to reconsider our history. So a lot of art historians these days are trying to reconsider and rewrite books about her history. So trying to incorporate all those artists that didn't have any chance to be featured in official art history outright. We call this outright in academia a lot of time, the outright discourse. So what were the subjects that were outright to be put into an art history book, for instance. So in terms of like minorities, that has been done a lot as well. I mean, a lot in the sense that like some things are starting to change. Knowledge production is also very much important. So from academia, we have a lot to do. When I speak myself as a researcher in university, to like kind of like break that issue as well. And so I think that is like a fundamental problem. And in art and visual art specifically, this continues to be perpetuated in the dynamics of the art world. So not only in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. So the art market, as well as, like when you look at auction results, how much is it like paintings from white European men going to auction and being sold? A lot, in contrast to the other subjects possible. So if we want to shift that, there has to be, I think, collaboration between knowledge production, policy. Policy is a big thing as well. So like creating a policy framework that helps that to shift, as well as all cultural institutions and the art market needs to as well acknowledge the problem and change. I think that it has been done somehow in the recent years as well. And when you talk about representation in a movie industry, and Netflix has done a lot in ways that we could criticize in much way, but I mean, this, I'm very much simplifying so much the topic, but the idea of like representation. So seeing ourselves represented into official cultural production. This has not been done much for minorities. So or like, as well as like, like gender dynamics also. So women or any folk from like the queer community as well. So this is little like being acknowledged and changed. And I think it seems like this is a very much Western centric point of view, but I think things like the Black Lives Matter a movement that has been taken like a larger scale in various ways that could be not like we should do a full talk about it, about how much controversy there is in it, but I think it's a big deal. And I think that especially as a European, what I need to think a lot about as well is like how as a researcher in social sciences, how much our framework of inequality and representation, especially in research and in exhibition, etc., is much rooted into Western academia. So what is the Asian perspective, for instance, as we are in Korea? How much literature has been informed, how much conversation has been informed from Asian standpoint? Not much, if you look at academia. So a lot of questions. I don't have answers. I just have other questions, I guess. I hope I answered.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I wasn't particularly picking on the art. I mean, I work in the media industry, and I think we're equally to blame there about general representation.
I would love to ask you what you think about Netflix, but maybe next time.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
So first of all, I'd like to congratulate with you. I was really impressed. And I mean, mine is more a comment than a question, a real question. Your word suggests me an ancient Italian way of saying, which is drop by drop, water can break the bridge. And in my opinion, art could be the metaphor of the drop, the single drop, that with his job could change some old ideas, some universe. For example, the idea that you say in which the man is the center of the universe. Just this.
Thank you so much. I hope so. I think that art by itself is not enough. It has to be a much more collaborative and structural change, because these issues, this paradigm is so much inherent and structural in our own full understanding of society it needs to be a collaboration. So I think that a lot of factors needs to come together. Art has hopefully a very promising position within this conversation. And that's why I love the intersection between art and diplomacy, because through and policy, through like a collaboration between cultural institutions and a very solid policy framework in terms of like art industry can really help. But I think everyone has to do their own point, like as individuals, as communities, as because it's really interesting. Like we talk, like so much people talk about this thing. We talk, but why it doesn't change? It doesn't change because when something is structured in a society and culturally after centuries, it's very easy to talk. It's not easy to change. Like it's so complicated. And you can, if you think about like how you perceive things yourself, and I do that a lot, there's so much things that I say and that I think that despite they're really not they're not related to how my conviction are, like what I think, still there. And these biases are still there. It's like so difficult to change. So I guess that drop by drop, they try.
Okay, we have one more question coming from the Zoom virtual living room. Okay. Hi, Magali.
Hi.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Hello. Hi.
Hello. Thank you so much for your conversation and your openness about the paradigm shift that has been happening and that needs to continue to happen. Along the lines of Charlie Miller's question, you talked about how meanings are attached, right? Yeah. The question now is, who are the people attaching these meanings? Or how interactive are these conversations when meanings are being attached?
Those are very interesting questions, and are questions that is very much complex to answer. The simple answer is the historical people in power. There's very much related to knowledge production and power. I don't know if you're, I'm so annoying because I'm so much academic in how I think. Michel Foucault, one of the first thinkers of post-structuralism, talks about how knowledge and power work hand in hand in cultural production and epistemical production. So as representation is fully, and meaning is related to representation. So how we confer meaning to things turn physical or abstract is fully arbitrary. It's like literally made by us. That is a glass is made by us. And that there is inequality between genders, or there's inequality between race or class is made by us. Who made it? People in power. Who were the people in power? White men. Historically. And why this happened? Because of economic and social reasons. So the way in which we can act is like to, I think, start acknowledging that, and just acknowledging that meaning is arbitrary is a big deal. It breaks certainties. Like the idea that everything that we live in is constructed is one of the first things that we learn in critical theory, and one of the first things that leaves us like speechless. Like there's nothing that's really, like history is constructed. The way we look at the world through a map is constructed because it's not a real, like when you say perspective, how do you say? The proportion. It's very much Eurocentric proportion. So the moment in which we acknowledge that, and that there's a big relationship between knowledge production and power, we can start thinking about how to get like over that kind of system, or like how do you shift power. Other thing that, because power creates power, conserves power, you know, like it's very much that. So that's a very simplistic way of saying things, but I think that the moment in which someone that works in the arts, someone that works in academia, someone that works in a position of power acknowledge that and opens the platform and uses that power in a generative manner. So like in a way that can help expanding the conversation, that is already first small step, you can say.
Thank you very much. And this is like the jam to end.
I'm not saying anything really smart and stuff, but
the thing is that it is so important, that is so crucial, that is so important. So I think I can say with this, class dismissed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.